Just a few months ago, in this very room, I experienced a personal highlight of my life so far. The bar mitzvah of my 13-year-old kiddo, Nidre. Now, bar mitzvahs are always meaningful for parents, but what made this experience so profound was watching Nidre take ownership of and pride in their Jewish identity in a new way. A few days after the bar mitzvah, a gift came in the mail. How often do gifts come in the mail? So Nidre excitedly opened the box and admired its content. It was a beautiful Star of David necklace. Nidre looked at it and said, "I love it, but I don't feel comfortable wearing a Jewish star in public right now. I'm gonna put it away for later." My heart sank. Could I ever have imagined a time in my life where my child would feel that it was not safe, not a good idea to wear an outward symbol of their Judaism? And in New York City, the most Jewish city in the United States, I could never have imagined this moment, but I understood it. For these are difficult, confounding, exhausting, scary, upsetting, and lonely times for Jews and members of Jewish families and communities. Tonight is Kol Nidre, a time for honesty about what is broken in our hearts and in our world. So it feels like the right time and the right moment to address anti-Semitism. And in the spirit of teshuvah, return and repair, the essence of these holidays, it is time to think about how we navigate this time that we find ourselves in. To start this conversation, I think it is both obvious and worth stating that anti-Semitism is not a new issue. It is, after all, considered the world's oldest hatred. Anti-Semitism, which I define tonight as advocate Stacey Burdett does, as a lie about Jews to blame them for whatever is wrong, is not new to us as American Jews. Those of us who at one point naively believed anti-Semitism was latent but not dangerous, shameful enough not to be uttered in polite society, were jolted into a new reality when unmasked Nazis marched in Charlottesville chanting, "Jews will not replace us." Then the horrific Tree of Life massacre, Poway, Colleyville, and so on. Looking back a few years ago, I knew that anti-Semitism existed in all spaces, but I only felt threatened by those people over there, the Nazis, conspiracy theorists, and those who weaponized anti-Semitism for political gain. That changed on October 7th and the days that followed, when the brutal Hamas attacks, which included murder, rape, and kidnapping, were met with praise and celebration from the halls of some universities, including some not so far from here, to the streets of every major city in the US, and this was before any Israeli military response. And in many cases, if attacks were not explicitly celebrated, they were justified or contextualized, as if Israeli citizens of all ages and backgrounds, including many lifelong peace activists, deserved this horrific fate simply by living in that space. Are there other groups of people whose murder would seem justified because of the actions of their government? How is this level of dehumanization possible? How could our devastation be someone else's jubilation? In the words of Rabbi Sharon Brous, to justify barbarity in the service of the liberation of Palestine requires more than an ideological commitment to Palestinian freedom. It demands mental and emotional contortions that render a person fundamentally unable to see the humanity of a Jew. It requires a deeply internalized association of Jews with power, Jews as the oppressor, victimizer, so much so that even a horrific terror attack, even teenagers and elders being carted naked through Gaza, does not evoke a gasp of horror or a tear. As we know, dehumanization has continued and hate has reared its ugly head. We've seen synagogues, restaurants, and homes of prominent Jews vandalized. We've seen verbal attacks and acts of physical aggression. The rebranding of the word Zionist to mean demonic settler, equal in moral stature to a Ben Gvir or Smotrich, acts as a gatekeeping mechanism separating many Jews from the social justice causes and spaces that they participated in on October 6th. And these are just a few examples. And all the while, Jewish fears around anti-Semitism have been and are being exploited by the other end of the political spectrum to further their own agenda, often one that is anti-democratic, anti-immigrant, and anti-education. For many of us, anti-Semitism firing on all cylinders at all times leaves us feeling unmoored, no longer knowing where we fit and whom to trust. Some of us are so regularly triggered that we're living in high panic mode, and others may not have that level of alarm, but still feel vulnerable and overwhelmed. And this is all really, really hard. And unfortunately, there are no easy answers, and there are no quick fixes. So, what can we do? Anti-Semitism shines a light on the way that others attempt to define what Judaism is or who Jews are. I believe that a first step is to take some of that power back by defining ourselves on our own terms. So tonight, I'm going to invite us to do this in a literal sense, to look at who we are as a people by examining the three primary names of the Jewish people: Ivri, Hebrew, Yisrael, and Yehudi. My hope is that through this framework, we can reconnect with our core values and find the strength to navigate this moment. Ivri. The first name for the Jewish people in the Torah is Ivri, commonly translated as Hebrew. Abraham is the first person to be called in Ivri. Our Midrash explains the name this way. When God saw that the entire world worshiped idols, and Abraham separated himself by not doing so, God called Abraham Ivri, from the Hebrew word ever, which means side. In other words, Abraham was willing to stand apart on the other side because of what he believed. I find it reassuring to imagine Abraham holding steady, standing up for himself and his beliefs in a world of people who did not share them. And what powerful inspiration for us right now. There are times when it is okay, it is in fact necessary to stand apart for what we believe. And by extension, there are times we need to stand up for ourselves and our core values. And this standing up can take a number of forms. However, in the spirit of being an Ivri, I want to invite us to consider how we might stand up for ourselves by taking a brave step of reaching out to a person in our lives that we feel may have ignored our pain or left us behind in this moment. And I acknowledge that this is incredibly difficult and scary. But with people we trust to be vulnerable with, we might find allies for support. A story. After October 7th, I was stunned by the silence of most of my interfaith clergy colleagues. This is a particular refrain from clergy, from rabbis across the country. I was particularly hurt that my closest Christian clergy partner had not reached out to me. She had recently moved out of New York City, but we had promised to stay in each other's lives. And as the weeks and months went on, I harbored resentment, and I was also afraid. This colleague was incredibly social justice minded, something that bonded us. But I wondered, could she see the humanity of both sides? Could she see my humanity? So we had reason to catch up a few months ago, and after some small talk, I summoned my inner Ivri, and I named the pain caused by the silence. And she listened, and she said, "I'm sorry. I didn't know if I should reach out because I was worried you were too overwhelmed, but I am here now." And I shared with her how challenging the last few months had been as a Jew, as a progressive Zionist, as a rabbi. And she listened, and when we ended the conversation, she said, "We need to see the humanity in all people. I am with you." A feeling of relief surged through my body. In summoning the courage to stand up for myself, I found I was not alone. The second name is Yisrael. As the story goes, the patriarch Jacob spends all night wrestling with what is both described as God and an angel. This wrestling match leaves him permanently changed, physically and spiritually, now blessed with a new name, Yisrael, which means to struggle with the divine. Yisrael becomes our people's name, and even more, it is a core part of our identity. We are the people who wrestle with big questions, who think critically, refuse easy answers, learn about others' viewpoints, and embrace complexity. Being Yisrael is central to Jewish self-understanding here at SAJ. We wear our intellectualism and questioning nature as badges of honor, and rightfully so. But at the same time, there are many in the Jewish community who contradict the core values found in the name Yisrael, who believe that we have to favor loyalty and obedience over critical thinking and nuance, who label any criticism of Israel or its government as anti-Semitic. If criticism of Israel is inherently anti-Semitic, what do we make of the over 100,000 Israelis who protested in the streets against the anti-democratic attempts at a judicial coup in 2023? How do we label the family members of Israeli hostages who marched on foot for 4 days from Tel Aviv to shout and protest in front of the Prime Minister's office in Jerusalem, demanding the Israeli government do more? And what about a rabbi, maybe one that you know, who loves Israel deeply and who disagrees with the way that the way the Israeli government is conducting this war, or disagrees with any number of policies of the government? Are all of us anti-Semitic? I think we can all agree, surely not. Now, that is not to say there are no red lines regarding criticism of Israel. When people erase the Jewish historical connection to the land or call for solutions that would displace 7 million Jews living in the land, half the world's Jewish population, that is when we know a line has been crossed from legitimate criticism of Israel into the realm of anti-Semitism. But being Yisrael today, to me, means being committed to open, thoughtful dialogue where we can have honest conversations about Israel while also standing up for our basic Jewish rights and dignity. It means embracing nuance and complexity when we talk about Israel Lamala, the Israel of our dreams, and Israel Lamata, the Israel of our current realities. And again, I acknowledge this is not easy, because anti-Semitism, especially when it manifests vis-a-vis Israel, can erode our sense of personal safety, particularly for those of us with more direct ties with the Shoah or periods of Jewish history where Jews kept passports or essential items under their bed at the ready. Yet our legitimate trauma responses do not always serve our communities. Our ancient ancestors understood this. In a stunning midrash, the rabbis imagine our patriarch Isaac bound on the altar by his father at the Akedah, and they say that the tears of the angels fell into his eyes, causing him to lose sight. This is not just a literal explanation of Isaac's later blindness. It is a warning about how trauma can blur our view. But we don't have to let it. By naming and giving space for our fears, we can acknowledge them while also seeing a wider picture. We can embrace complexity and nuance and work on long-term relationship building to gain allies who support us and with whom we can build a better world. Yehudi, the last name of the Jewish people, is Yehudi, or Jew. The name originates from the matriarch Leah, who named her fourth son Yehudah. When he was born, she said, Hapa'am odeh et Adonai. This time, I am thanking God. Yehudah comes from the word thanks, giving thanks. With the birth of her earlier sons, Leah had hoped that her husband might come to love her. But with the birth of her fourth son, Yehudah, Leah is not shouting from the rooftops. She has accepted her fate. And in this light, we might translate the name Yehudah as giving thanks despite how difficult things are. Or perhaps more poetically, affirming life even when things are hard. Now, Leah must have been clairvoyant, because this is exactly who we are. We are the people who keep praying and celebrating even in difficult times, even when we are not loved by others around us. We are the people whose ancestors lit candles and hid them inside stoves. The people who fashioned makeshift menorahs or ritual objects in concentration camps. We are part of the same people who today are rebuilding the kibbutzim decimated on October 7th. When anti-Semitism is rearing its ugly head, let us remember that we are Yehudim, a resilient people who affirm life, even when it is challenging. And as Yehudim, we can cling to our traditions to remind ourselves that life is good and holy and that we can make it so. And while being Yehudi does not make the unsolvable solved, it can give us the fortitude to face what is hard. A final story to conclude. Earlier this year, I brought a conversion candidate before the Beit Din, a court of 3 rabbis. The Beit Din was scheduled weeks prior, and it turned out that this conversion ritual was going to be about 1 week after October 7th. At the Beit Din, I asked the question I always ask, one that years ago was theoretical, but has become very real over the past years and obviously was very close to home that day. I asked, are you sure? Are you sure you want to join the Jewish people, given the history and present of anti-Semitism? The candidate thought for a moment and said, I feel even more strongly now. We are a people who stand for justice and compassion. We are a people who question everything and do not settle for easy answers. We are a people who celebrate life. It is my privilege to join the Jewish community and to help it continue into the future. He got it. In the face of the people and the forces that seek to destabilize us, to take away our power and our agency, let us remember who we are. We are Ivri, with beliefs and values that help us stand apart and stand up for ourselves. We are Yisrael, wrestlers with God and humanity, embracing complexity and thoughtful discernment, even when conversations are hard. And we are Yehudi. In the face of hate and adversity, we keep going. We dig deep to find gratitude and even joy in the most difficult of circumstances. We affirm life. That is who we are. Gomar Hatima Tova.